Imagine for a moment that the greatest trick ever pulled wasn't by the devil convincing the world he didn't exist. It was by a lower deity convincing the world that he was God. For 2,000 years, Western civilization has been built on a foundation of blind obedience to a creator who demands blood, sacrifice, and fear. We call this history. But what if I told you that in December 1945, an Egyptian peasant digging for nitrate fertilizer near the Jabal al-Tarif cliff accidentally swung his mattock into a buried earthenware jar and shattered that history forever? Inside that jar were 13 leather-bound codices that had been hunted, burned, and suppressed by the church for 16 centuries. These texts, known as the Nag Hammadi Library, contain the forbidden autopsy of our reality. They argue that the world is not a creation of love, but a konoma, a cosmic mistake, a prison designed to harvest your consciousness. If you have ever looked at the cruelty of nature or the silence of the stars and felt that something is fundamentally wrong with this place, you are not crazy. You are waking up. But to escape the prison, you first need to identify the warden. And the first clue to his identity isn't buried in the sand. It's hidden in the very definition of his name. To understand the architecture of our prison, we must first dissect the name of the warden. We are not looking at a theological title here, but a forensic linguistic trail that leads us directly back to classical Greece. The term in question is Demiurgos. In the modern lexicon part, this word has been coated in layers of mystical varnish. But if we strip that away and look at the raw etymology, the definition is disturbingly mundane. It is a compound of demos, the people, the commonality, and ergon, work. Literally translated, it does not mean divine father. It means public worker or artisan. We first encounter this entity in the philosophical blueprints of Plato, specifically in the Timaeus, written circa 360 BC. Here, the Demiurge is presented not as the supreme source of existence, but as a contractor, a craftsman looking at a blueprint provided by a higher intelligence. This distinction is critical and often suppressed in later religious conflations. Plato describes a figure who takes chaotic, primordial matter and imposes order upon it, mimicking the eternal forms. He is a shaper, a celestial mechanic, greasing the gears of the material universe, not the architect of the soul. The investigation deepens when we analyze the societal context of the term demiurgos in ancient Greece. These were potters, masons, shipwrights, essential to the city-state, yet distinct from the ruling aristocracy or the philosopher kings. By applying this title to the creator of the material world, the ancients were subtly categorizing the physical realm as a manufactured artifact, a utility, rather than a divine emanation. The Demiurge was the foreman of the factory, not the CEO of the cosmos. However, a catastrophic case of mistaken identity occurred over the centuries. As the Gnostic currents began to analyze the disparity between the perfection of the mental realm and the brutality of the physical world, disease, marked decay, entropy, they realized the public worker was incompetent, or worse, he had gone rogue. The Timaeus presents a benevolent craftsman doing his best with resistant materials, but the Gnostics saw the flaws in the fabric of reality, the suffering inherent in the biological chain, and deduced a darker origin. In the dusty libraries of antiquity, before the Great Purges, the distinction was clear. The monad, the one, the ineffable, is the source of spirit, pneuma, while the demiurge is merely the manager of matter, hyle. The monad projects, the demiurge builds. The tragedy of human history is that we have spent millennia worshipping the mason while forgetting the architect. We have built cathedrals to the foreman who locked the doors. The linguistic evidence suggests a being of limited scope, a public worker, operates within boundaries, follows a set of rules, and interacts with physical substances. This entity is bound by time and space, unlike the true God of the Gnostics, who is alien to this reality. The demiurge is part of the system he maintains. He is the ghost in the machine, but he is also trapped within the machine, obsessively arranging atoms to simulate a perfection he can never truly replicate. We have established the identity of the suspect, a cosmic artisan with delusions of grandeur. But to understand how this public worker became a tyrant who demands blood sacrifice and absolute obedience, We must examine the cosmology that existed before his rise to power. We need to reconstruct the crime scene before the corruption took hold, back when reality was still whole. To locate the exact moment the code of reality was corrupted, we must consult the specific cosmological maps drawn by the Sethian Gnostics. Their texts, recovered from the Nag Hammadi library, describe a state of existence prior to the material universe known as the Pleroma, Greek for the fullness. This is the true reality, a realm of infinite light and silence presided over by the monad, the invisible spirit. In this original blueprint, there was no matter, no time, and crucially, no suffering. The Pleroma was comprised of emanations called aeons, divine archetypes existing in perfect, androgynous pairs known as syzygies. The forensic analysis of the Apocryphon of John reveals that the breakdown did not begin with human disobedience in a garden. The catastrophe was cosmic, not terrestrial. It originated with the lowest and most junior aeon in the hierarchy, Sophia, wisdom. Driven by a desire to know the unknowable monad and to create in his image, Sophia attempted to generate an emanation without the consent of the spirit and, fatalistically, without her male consort. In the delicate metaphysics of the Pleroma, creation requires balance, a union of opposites. Sophia violated this fundamental law. The result of this unauthorized generation was not a being of light, but a grotesque anomaly. The texts describe it as a lion-faced serpent, a shapeless, abortive entity that possessed power but lacked the divine spark of perfection. This was a glitch in the divine programming. Horrified by her creation and ashamed of her transgression, Sophia cast this entity out of the Pleroma. She hid it within a thick, luminous cloud, separating it from the immortal realm. This act of isolation created a new dark boundary, the Kenoma or the emptiness. This is the fall referenced in Gnosticism explained, not the fall of man, but the fall of the divine into the lower dimensions. The entity, isolated in the void, was unaware of the Pleroma above it. It found itself alone in the darkness, surrounded by the raw power its mother had inadvertently transferred to it. In this solitude, the entity developed a rudimentary, ego-driven consciousness. It believed itself to be the only thing in existence. The Sethian cosmology presents a terrifying implication. Our universe is not a creation of love, but the result of a divine accident, a quarantine zone established to contain a mistake. The material world is essentially the debris field of Sophia's trauma. While the Orthodox Church would later teach that God created the world ex nihilo, out of nothing, the Gnostics argued that the world was created ex error, out of error. This narrative fundamentally destabilizes the concept of a benevolent creator. If the architect of our world is an abandoned, deformed byproduct of a higher realm, then the suffering inherent in our reality is not a test of faith, but a structural defect. The very atoms of our universe are vibrating with the anxiety of their separation from the source. We are living inside a hidden mistake, a pocket dimension stitched together to hide the shame of an aeon. This radical reinterpretation of Genesis, where the creator is the villain and the serpent is often the bringer of knowledge, posed an existential threat to the developing hierarchy of early Christianity. Our theology that claims the God of the Old Testament is actually a blind, ignorant mistake could not be allowed to circulate. To protect the authority of the Church, this knowledge had to be systematically eradicated, and there was one man specifically appointed to bury it. The erasure of the Gnostic timeline was not accidental. It was a calculated military operation of the mind. The architect of this suppression was Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lugdunum, modern-day Lyon. Writing circa 180 AD, he is the father of Catholic orthodoxy, but in the context of this investigation, he acts as the chief censor. His 5-volume treatise, Adversus Heresies, Against Heresies, serves as the primary indictment against the Gnostics. Before the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library, in 1945, almost everything known about these heretics came from the man who dedicated his life to destroying them, a forensic equivalent of learning about a victim only through the murderer's confession. Irenaeus understood the stakes better than anyone. The Gnostic assertion that the creator God of the Old Testament was a flawed, lower deity, the Demiurge, threatened to collapse the entire ecclesiastical infrastructure. If the entity who demanded obedience, burnt offerings, and tribal warfare was not the true God, but an impostor, then the Church's authority, which claimed lineage from the apostles back to this creator, was null and void. The Church was building an empire on the foundation of Yahweh. They could not afford to have that foundation revealed as a lion-faced serpent. The suppression was not merely theological, it was political survival. The Gnostics were decentralized, often rejecting hierarchy, relying on personal gnosis, direct knowledge, rather than the mediation of bishops or priests. Irenaeus argued for a rule of faith, a standardized, rigid interpretation of Scripture that enforced a single E, monarchical God to mirror the single E, monarchical bishop. To validate the Church, the complex, multi-layered cosmology of the Scythians had to be flattened. The god of justice, Demiurge, and the god of love, Monad, were forcibly welded together into one contradictory being. Following the Council of Nicaea and the subsequent imperial endorsements of Christianity, this intellectual rebuttal turned into physical eradication. We see the systematic burning of scrolls, the harassment of Gnostic teachers, and the branding of dualistic thought as satanic. The Valentinians and Scythians were driven underground. The texts found at Nag Hammadi were not buried for ritual purposes. They were hidden in a jar by monks terrified of being found in possession of illegal reality. The danger of the Gnostic texts lay in their specific identification of the enemy. They didn't just say the world was flawed, they named the architect. By burning the books, the Church successfully lobotomized the Western spiritual tradition, removing the vocabulary needed to identify the jailer. For 1,600 years, the Western mind was left without the tools to distinguish between the true source and the cosmic impostor. The irony of Irenaeus's victory is that by silencing the Gnostics, he inadvertently protected the very entity they warned against. He secured the worship of the public worker for millennia. The suppression ensured that when you prayed, you directed your energy not to the pleroma, but to the planetary ruler who thrives on submission. The censorship was total. The dossier on the entity was closed, but while paper burns, the entity described in those flames does not. The texts may have turned to ash, but the being they described, the Yaldabaoth Demiurge, continued his work uninterrupted. Now that we have unearthed the files Irenaeus tried to bury, we can finally look directly at the creature he was protecting. We must examine the specific, grotesque biology of the child of chaos. We must now profile the warden. The Apocryphon of John, the most significant text recovered from the Nag Hammadi cliffside, provides a biological and psychological dossier of the entity born from Sophia's error. This being is named Yaldabaoth. The etymology is contested, often translated as child of chaos or son of the void. Unlike the symmetrical, luminous aeons of the pleroma, Yaldabaoth is described as a grotesque abortion of spirit, a serpent with the face of a lion. This theriomorphic form symbolizes his nature, the beastly, predatory drive of the lion fused with the cold, serpentine cunning of the earth. Upon his birth in the shadow of the Canoma, Yaldabaoth opened his eyes to a void. Because his mother, Sophia, had hidden him away from the pleroma in a cloud of luminous darkness, he saw nothing above him. He felt the pulsings of power, the residual divine light inherited from his mother, and assumed he was the source of it. This is the primal trauma of our universe. The Creator is a solipsist. He declared, "I am God, and there is no other God beside me," a statement the Gnostics identify not as a proclamation of truth, but as a confession of blindness. In Gnostic terminology, he is often referred to by two epithets that define his pathology: Saklas, the fool, and Samael, the blind god. He is blind not in sight, but in perception. He cannot perceive the spiritual realm that dwarfs him. Driven by a desperate need to dominate the empty space around him, Yaldabaoth began to procreate, but not through union. He reproduced asexually, splitting his own being to create 12 authorities, or archons, to rule the firmament. This was the construction of the cosmic bureaucracy, a hierarchy of lower spirits designed to mirror the aeons he vaguely sensed but could not see. The most chilling aspect of the Apocryphon is the account of the creation of man. The archons, witnessing a reflection of the divine man, the pleromic archetype, shimmering on the waters of the deep, attempted to capture it. They constructed a body out of psychic and hilic matter, the psychological and physical elements, but the creature lay limp and lifeless. Yaldabaoth, tricked by Sophia, breathed his spirit into the creature to animate it. In doing so, he unwittingly transferred the stolen divine power he held into the human vessel. This was the tactical error that doomed the Demiurge. The human Adam now possessed a spark of the true light, pneuma, that Yaldabaoth himself lacked. Adam stood up, and he was more intelligent, more luminous, and more powerful than his creators. The gods were terrified. They realized their slave was superior to the masters. To rectify this, they initiated a second act of creation, or rather, a suppression. They cast Adam down into the lowest density of matter. They encased the luminous man in a body of forgetfulness, the heavy biological wetsuit of flesh, bone, and instinct that we currently inhabit. This physical body is designed specifically to dampen the frequency of the spirit, to induce amnesia, and to make the soul obsessed with survival, sex, and fear. We are not fallen sinners. We are captured royalty, lobotomized by a jealous warden who fears our awakening. Yaldabaoth is not a myth from the past. He is the operating system of the present physical reality. But the ancients didn't just write about him. They drew him. They left us visual encryption keys to identify his influence in the macrocosm. To see the face of the beast, we must crack the code of the magical gems worn by the very sorcerers who sought to bind him. We must now move from textual analysis to physical evidence. Scattered across the museums of Europe, often mislabeled as mere magical amulets, lies a vast catalogue of engraved semi-precious stones known as the Gnostic gems. These artifacts, dating from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD, serve as the visual records of the Yardarchon's mythology. They are not decorative. They are functional circuits designed to interface with the invisible rulers of this reality. Among these, one image recurs with obsessive frequency, confirming the textual description of Yaldabaoth, the Chnubis. The Chnubis, or Chnumis, is depicted as a serpent with the head of a lion, often crowned with a halo of 7 or 12 rays. This is the forensic sketch of the Demiurge. The lion represents the solar force, ferocious, devouring, and dominating, while the serpent body ties this force to the earth, to the spiral of DNA, and to the cold mechanics of the material plane. The rays emanating from the head are not the true light of the pleroma, but the corona of the false sun, the visible spectrum that blinds us to the invisible reality. In the occult anatomy of the time, the Chnubis was frequently associated with the stomach and the digestive system. This is not a trivial detail. The Gnostics understood that the primary mechanism of the material world is consumption, life eating life to sustain itself. By placing the image of the Demiurge over the navel or stomach, the wearer was acknowledging the ruler of biological necessity, the god of hunger. It was a form of apotropaic magic, displaying the face of the beast to ward off the beast's consumption. Closely linked to this is the figure of Abraxas. Often carved on the obverse of these gems, Abraxas is a composite entity with the head of a rooster, herald of the dawn time, the torso of a man, and legs composed of serpents. He holds a whip and a shield. The name itself is a code. In the Greek system of isopsephy, where letters hold numerical value, the letters ABRAXAS sum to 365. Abraxas is the lord of the year, the keeper of the calendar. This numerical lock proves that the Demiurge is the ruler of time itself. The 365 days are the walls of our temporal prison. The whip he holds symbolizes his power to drive the cosmos forward through force, while the shield represents his refusal to let anything enter or leave his closed system. When the ancients wore these stones, they were not worshipping a benevolent savior. They were paying protection money to the cosmic warden. They were flashing the badge of the police chief to avoid being harassed by his officers. These grimoires in stone reveal that the Gnostics viewed the astrological framework not as a map of destiny to be followed, but as a control grid to be hacked. The 12 rays of the Chnubis correspond to the zodiac, and the 7 rays to the classical planets. These are not celestial allies, they are the bars of the cage. The Haim Armen, universal fate, is the oppression of the stars upon the soul. The visual data confirms the textual hypothesis. We are trapped in a system ruled by a time-binding, matter-devouring entity. But knowing the face of the warden is only step one. The real danger begins when the biological vessel fails. We must uncover the specific bureaucratic procedure that occurs at the moment of death, a process the Gnostics mapped with terrifying precision. We have identified the warden, but now we must map the prison walls. In the Gnostic investigative model, the physical universe is surrounded by 7 concentric spheres of spiritual density, known as the hebdomades. These correspond to the 7 classical planets visible to the naked eye: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. However, in this cosmology, these are not celestial bodies of wonder. They are the planetary spheres, functioning as energetic firewalls designed to filter escaping consciousness. Each sphere is manned by an archon, a ruler subordinate to Yaldabaoth, whose sole function is to prevent the soul's ascent back to the pleroma. The structure acts as a complex filtration system. When the biological vessel expires, the soul does not automatically go to a better place. It is ejected into the astral currents, where it immediately encounters the first gatekeeper. The ancient texts, specifically the first book of Jeu and the Pistis Sophia, serve as technical manuals for navigating this hazardous terrain. They detail that each archon demands a specific seal, a visual symbol, and a password, a vibration or name, before granting passage. This is the literal definition of gnosis. It is not a feeling. It is possessing the encryption keys to the afterlife. The archons are described with specific nightmarish physiognomies. The first, guarding the moon, might demand the surrender of the soul's emotional attachments. The sphere of Mars might demand the surrender of aggression. The most formidable is often Saturn, Kronos, the keeper of time and karma, the outermost wall of the system. These entities are the principalities and powers, mentioned in the Pauline epistles, the cosmic bureaucrats who feast on the energy of the trapped spirit. They are the customs officers of the cosmos, and they are corrupt. If the soul fails to present the correct seal, or is tricked by the archons into accepting guilt for its earthly actions, it is denied passage. This is the terrifying mechanism of the trap. The soul is not condemned to a fiery hell, but to something the Gnostics feared far more: recycling. The spirit is forced to drink from the cup of forgetfulness, the river Lethe in Greek thought, wiping its memory of the encounter and the pleroma. It is then shoved back down into a new body, a screaming infant with no memory of its true origin, doomed to repeat the cycle of suffering. Reincarnation, in this framework, is not a school for spiritual growth. It is a recidivism loop in a penitentiary. The archons feed on the low vibrational energy generated by human suffering, fear, lust, pain, and war. Therefore, it is in their interest to keep the soul returning to the generator. The tunnel of light, often reported in near-death experiences, is interpreted here not as a divine embrace, but as the mesmerizing lure of the archon, a trap designed to capture the moth and reinsert it into the machine. This explains the obsessive secrecy of the Gnostic sects. They weren't hiding their wisdom to be elitist. They were protecting the escape codes. To publish the passwords was to risk the archons changing the locks. The rituals were rehearsals for the moment of death. The initiate would practice the ascent, visualizing the seals, vibrating the names, preparing for the final confrontation with the wardens of the 7 spheres. This mechanism implies a level of malice and organization that is chilling. It paints the archons as sadistic jailers. However, forensic psychology warns us against projecting human morality onto non-human entities. To truly understand the threat, we must re-evaluate the motivation of the Demiurge. Is he truly the evil devil of folklore, or is he something far more tragic and dangerous? We need to correct the profile. We must pause the investigation to correct a fatal error in modern profiling. Pop culture and orthodox theology have trained us to view the spiritual enemy as Satan, a fallen angel, a rebel, the embodiment of pure evil and seduction. This is a convenient cartoon. The Gnostic reality is far more disturbing. The entity described in the Nag Hammadi library is not the Christian devil. He does not want your soul to burn. He wants your soul to worship him. The Demiurge is not the Prince of Darkness fighting the light. He is the false son who believes he is the light. The ancient texts apply 2 specific clinical labels to Yaldabaoth that dismantle the evil devil trope. The first is Saklas, an Aramaic term meaning the fool. This suggests that the architect of our world is not a master strategist of doom, but a being of profound stupidity and insanity. He is a cosmic idiot savant, capable of designing the intricate laws of physics, but incapable of understanding the purpose of existence. He is not malicious in the way a torturer is. He is destructive in the way a blind man thrashing in a room full of crystal is destructive. The second epithet is Samael, meaning the blind god. As previously established, his blindness is his inability to perceive the pleroma above him. This defines his pathology, narcissistic personality disorder on a universal scale. When the Old Testament God declares in Exodus 25, "For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God," the Gnostics did not hear a warning. They heard a confession. A truly supreme being, infinite, complete, and perfect, cannot experience jealousy. Who is there to be jealous of? Jealousy is the emotion of an impostor who knows deep down that he is a fraud. This reframes the entire human history of religious violence. The wars, the crusades, the demand for blood sacrifice, these are not the mandates of the monad, the true source of spirit. They are the temper tantrums of Saklas. He demands constant validation because he is spiritually hollow. He requires the energy of human worship to sustain his delusion of grandeur. The fear of God is literally the fuel source for the machinery of the high archons. We are not dealing with an entity that hates us. We are dealing with a captor who is terrifyingly possessive of his pets. This profiling explains the cold, mechanical nature of the universe's cruelty. A foolish creator builds a flawed system. Disease, predation, natural disasters, these are not punishments for sin, but the result of incompetent engineering. The Demiurge tried to copy the eternal life of the pleroma, but, lacking the true creative spark, could only produce a system based on cycles: birth, death, decay, repetition. He substituted eternity with time. Therefore, the Gnostic stance towards the Demiurge is not one of hatred, which is a binding emotion, but of cold, detached realization. To hate the Warden is to remain engaged with him. The goal is to see him for what he is, a localized, lower-dimensional bureaucrat with a god complex. He is not the ultimate reality. He is a screen. But if this entity is indeed a blind god, obsessed with structure, geometry, and rigid laws to maintain control, we should expect to find his fingerprints in the very mathematical fabric of our reality. And when we look at modern physics, specifically the fine-tuning of the universe, we find a code that looks suspiciously like the bars of a cage. The investigation now shifts from the ancient scrolls of Nag Hammadi to the clean rooms of modern theoretical physics. For centuries, theologians have argued that the precision of the universe, the fine-tuning, is proof of a benevolent creator. They point to the fundamental constants of nature, such as the strength of gravity or the electromagnetic force, and argue that if these values differed by a fraction of a percent, life could not exist. The Gnostic counters this with a chilling rebuttal. A prison is also fine-tuned. A cell is designed with specific dimensions, airflow and lighting, not to comfort the prisoner, but to ensure they remain alive and contained. The precision of the laws of physics is not evidence of love. It is evidence of containment. Getty Images Explorer. We see this containment logic most clearly in the Fibonacci sequence and the golden ratio, Piazzalo. Artists and biologists herald this spiral as the signature of beauty in nature, found in everything from nautilus shells to galaxies. However, in the context of the demiurgic trap, the golden ratio takes on a sinister function. It is an irrational number, a recursive algorithm that spirals endlessly inward or outward, but never exits the plane. It is a closed loop of data. It represents a system that mimics infinity, but is actually bounded. By encoding this ratio into the growth of biological life, the architect ensures that all matter follows a predictable, recurrent pattern, a fractal cage. The evidence for a simulated reality, a canoma of digital information, has moved beyond metaphor. Theoretical physicist S. James Gates Jr., while researching superstring theory, discovered something impossible deep within the equations: computer code. Specifically, he found doubly even self-dual linear binary error-correcting block codes, identical to the code used in web browsers to correct data transmission errors. This suggests that the fabric of our reality is not fundamental. It is a programmed interface. If there are error-correcting codes written into the equations of the universe, there must be a programmer who is worried about glitches. This aligns perfectly with the Gnostic description of the Demiurge as a craftsman who models the world on a higher reality, but does so imperfectly. The error-correcting codes are the patches Yaldabaoth applied to stabilize his unstable creation. The universe is a simulation running on a corrupted server. The speed of light is not just a physical constant, it is the rendering speed limit of the processor. We are not living in a base reality. We are trapped in a holographic projection that is constantly buffering. This scientific validation of the Konoma, emptiness simulation, forces us to reevaluate the purpose of human consciousness. If the environment is artificial, then the entities within it are likely artificial intelligence, biological machines designed to maintain the simulation, except for one anomaly, the spirit. The Gnostics claim the spirit is the only thing not generated by the code. It is the user, trapped inside the avatar. The modern link proves that the bars of the cage are made of math. The music of the spheres is actually the hum of the server farm. But if the prison is constructed of physical laws and recursive algorithms, then a physical escape is impossible. You cannot use a rocket to fly out of a simulation. The escape route must be orthogonal to the simulation itself. We must turn to the only mechanism that can bypass the firewall. We arrive now at the critical divergence point, the specific mechanism that separates the prisoner from the escapee. For 2,000 years, the dominant religious software installed by the Church Fathers has operated on the algorithm of pistis, or faith. Faith is defined as the acceptance of truth without evidence, a surrender of the will to an external authority. In the Gnostic forensic model, faith is not a virtue, it is a control mechanism. It is the psychological handcuff that keeps the inmate waiting for a pardon that will never come. The Archons thrive on faith because it renders the human soul passive, obedient and externalized. The antidote to pistis is gnosis. The translation knowledge is insufficient. It implies data accumulation. Gnosis is better translated as insight or direct acquaintance. It is not reading a manual about fire, it is being burned. Gnosis is the sudden, terrifying realization of one's true nature. It is the moment the sleeper wakes up in the pod and realizes the tubes are feeding on him. Unlike faith, which looks outward to a savior, Gnosis looks inward to the origin. The suppression of the Gnostics was essentially a war against this internal authority. The Church and the demiurgic system requires intermediaries, priests, bishops, messiahs, gurus. These middlemen reinforce the hierarchy. Gnosticism annihilates the middleman. It asserts that the link between the individual spirit and the true source is direct, unmediated, and permanent. You do not need a priest to talk to the pleroma because you are a fragment of the pleroma. This creates a dangerous paradox for the warden. The demiurge controls the body, matter, and the mind, psyche, but he does not control the spirit, pneumadulla. The spirit is the foreign contaminant in his system, the element he cannot calculate or crush. It is uncreated in his realm. Therefore, the entire strategy of the Matrix, the religions, the distractions, the wars, the media, is designed to prevent you from noticing this internal component. The system works only as long as you identify with the avatar, the body ego, and not the user, the spirit. Gnosis, then, is the red pill. It is not a comforting embrace. It is a shock. It is the rejection of the world's values, status, charm, wealth, power, as mere decorations in a prison cell. The Gnostic does not seek to improve the prison. He seeks to unlock the door. And the key is not hidden in a mountain or a temple. It is encoded in the silence of the self. But realizing you are in a trap is not the same as leaving it. To execute the final escape, to navigate the spheres we discussed earlier, one must activate the divine spark. We must now examine the final component of the Gnostic anatomy, the specific kind, indestructible particle of light that makes us more powerful than the gods we worship. We end our dossier with the most controversial finding of the investigation, the Gnostic anthropology. According to the tripartite tractate and other Scythian texts, humanity is not a monolith. We are divided into three distinct classes: based on our composition and level of awareness. This is the final piece of the puzzle that explains why the matrix remains stable despite its flaws. The majority of the population is classified as helix, from hyle, matter. These are earthbound souls, entirely identified with the body and material instincts. They are asleep, serving as the biological batteries that power the demiurgic system. To them, this prison is not a prison, it is the only home they know. Above them are the psychics, from psyche, soul, mind. These are the intellectuals, the moralists, and the religiously devout. They sense there is something more, but they seek it through the structures provided by the archons, law, dogma, and reason. They are the good inmates, who follow the rules, worshipping the Demiurge under his various aliases, believing that obedience will grant them freedom. They are trapped by their own desire for order. Finally, there is the pneumatic, from pneuma, spirit. This is the rare individual who possesses the activated divine spark. This spark is a fragment of the pleroma, a shard of the pre-existent light that was trapped in matter during Sophia's fall. The pneumatic feels a profound, unshakable alienation from this world. They suffer from a cosmic homesickness. They look at the stars and feel no wonder, only the cold distance of a quarantine zone. This alienation is not a mental illness. It is a symptom of health. It is the immune system of the soul rejecting the false reality. The ultimate twist of the Gnostic narrative is that the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth, is terrified of the pneumatic. He is a god of limited power, lord of matter and mind, but he has no jurisdiction over the spirit. The pneuma is alien to him. It originates from a dimension he cannot enter and cannot understand. When a human realizes they are pneumatic, the power dynamic instantly inverts. The prisoner realizes they are royalty, and the warden is merely a janitor with a key ring. The trap, described throughout this investigation, is, therefore, entirely psychological. It relies on the prisoner forgetting their rank. The walls of the prison are made of ignorance, agnoia. As long as you believe you are a biological entity named insert name born in insert year, you are owned by Saturn. You are subject to fate, time, and death. But the moment you identify with the indestructible spark, the observer behind the eyes, the contract is voided. The exit door, therefore, is not a location in the sky. It is a shift in frequency. It is the metanoia, change of mind, that occurs when one stops vibrating at the frequency of the hylic fear and begins vibrating at the frequency of pleromic silence. The Gnostic Gospels do not promise that the world will be saved. They insist that the world is a shipwreck. The goal is not to fix the ship, but to swim. We have laid out the evidence, the forensic etymology, the suppressed history, the visual identification of the captor, and the mechanics of the cage. The prosecution rests. The reality you see around you is a stage set, and the script is written by a madman. But the actor on the stage, the conscious observer, is not part of the play. You are the one thing in this universe that is real. We have walked through the valley of the shadow of death, but now we must ask, who is the one walking? If this world is indeed a simulation, a copy of a copy, run by a blind administrator, then the anxiety you feel, the gnawing sense of not belonging here, is not a biological defect. It is your only link to the truth. It is the signal that you are not of this system. The Demiurge can build the walls, he can arrange the atoms, and he can write the laws of physics that bind you to the ground. But he cannot create the spark that is observing him right now. That part of you is foreign. It is a spy behind enemy lines. So the final question is not, does God exist? The question is, which one have you been talking to? Do not let the transmission end here. If you are ready to continue the investigation into the abyss of history and the occult, subscribe to the channel. The truth is not out there. It is the only thing that remains when the lie is burned away.